My girlfriend asked me to go out for dinner one night, and I almost canceled because I was completely drained from work. It had been one of those weeks where everything seemed to go wrong. I was working late every day, barely sleeping, and honestly, I just wanted to go home and forget about the world for a few hours. She texted me, "Please don't cancel. Just give me one evening." I almost made up an excuse, but something about that message made me get in my car. When I picked her up, she was wearing the same blue dress she had worn on our very first date. I smiled and asked if that was intentional. She just laughed and said, "Maybe." Instead of taking me to some expensive restaurant, she had chosen a small family-owned Italian place tucked away on a quiet street. There were candles on every table, an old couple dancing slowly near the jukebox, and the whole place smelled like fresh bread and garlic. For the first 20 minutes, we barely talked about anything important. We joked about old memories, argued over what movie was the worst we'd ever seen together, and laughed about the time we got completely lost on a road trip because I refused to use GPS. Then, while we were waiting for dessert, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She slid it across the table and said, "Open it." I thought it was a birthday card or maybe a list of places she wanted to travel. Instead, it was a handwritten list of little moments from our relationship. The first time I waited outside her job in the rain because her car wouldn't start. The night I stayed on the phone with her until sunrise because she was having a panic attack about her future. The random Tuesday when I drove across town just to bring her the strawberry cheesecake she had casually mentioned craving a week earlier. At the bottom of the page, she had written, "You always think you have to do something big to make me happy, but these tiny moments are the reason I fell in love with you." I just sat there staring at the paper. I honestly couldn't remember half of those things because, to me, they were just normal. They were the kind of things you do for someone you care about. She looked at me and smiled. Then she said something I'll probably remember for the rest of my life. "If one day we stop being together, I don't think I'll miss the fancy dates or the gifts. I'll miss the little things that made me feel like I was your favorite person in the world." I didn't know what to say. The waiter came over with our dessert, saw the look on my face, and quietly walked away without interrupting us. When we finally left the restaurant, we sat in the car for almost an hour, talking about where we wanted our lives to go, what kind of home we dreamed of having, and all the little adventures we still wanted to share. Before I drove her home, I folded that piece of paper and put it in my wallet. Years later, it's faded and the corners are worn out, but I still carry it with me. Because out of every gift I've ever received, nothing has ever reminded me more that real love is usually hidden inside the smallest moments. A few months after that dinner, I lost my wallet while I was traveling for work. At first, I wasn't even worried. I figured I could cancel my cards, replace my ID, and move on. Then it hit me. That little folded note she had given me at dinner was still inside. I must have searched that hotel room 10 times. I checked under the bed, in the bathroom, even inside the trash can. I called the front desk, the taxi company, and every place I had stopped that day. Nothing. When I got home, she could tell something was wrong. She asked if I had lost money, and I just shook my head. I said, "I lost your note." She looked confused for a second and asked, "The one from our dinner date?" I nodded. I told her I didn't even care about the wallet. I just wanted that piece of paper back because it was the first time anyone had ever made me feel like the little things I did actually mattered. She didn't say anything after that. She just walked over, wrapped her arms around me, and hugged me tighter than she ever had before. A few days later, she asked me to meet her at the same little Italian restaurant where she had given me the first note. We sat at the exact same table. After we ordered, she reached into her purse again. I actually laughed and said, "Please tell me that's not another bill." She smiled and slid another folded piece of paper across the table. When I opened it, I realized it wasn't the same note. It was longer. She had rewritten every memory from the first one, but this time she added dozens of moments I had completely forgotten. The day I drove across town just because she texted me that she was having a bad day. The time I waited outside in the freezing cold because she was nervous to walk to her car alone after work. The random Sunday morning when I spent 3 hours helping her build a bookshelf, even though I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. The night I stayed awake until 4 a.m. helping her practice for a job interview. At the very bottom, there was one new sentence. "You thought you lost the note, but the truth is, you gave me these memories, and nobody can ever steal those." I couldn't even read the last line without tearing up. She reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "You know what the funny part is?" I asked, "What?" She smiled and said, "I never wrote that list because I was afraid you'd forget those moments. I wrote it because I was afraid one day you'd forget how much you meant to me." I folded that note carefully and put it in my pocket.